The dome shook again, creaking like an old man's knees, and Dr. Isolde Thorne found herself contemplating the incredible variety of ways one could die 3 miles beneath Europa's icy crust. "Just another beautiful day in paradise," she muttered, her voice dripping with sarcasm as she adjusted the micro-adjusters on her helmet. Dominic, the dome's resident engineer and all-around pessimist, snorted from his workstation, a rat's nest of cables and blinking lights. "If by paradise you mean this rusted can keeping us from being squashed like bugs, then yeah, absolutely." The dome, an underwater research facility officially christened the lunatic asylum by its inhabitants, hummed with the constant, reassuring dread of technology on the brink of catastrophic failure. It was shaped like a half-crushed tin can and about as welcoming. Outside, the endless ocean pressed against the walls, a dark, unknowable void teeming with creatures either deadlier than a board meeting or as dumb as a corporate mission statement. "I swear if you don't stop talking, I'm going to feed you to the damn squids," Isolde shot back, her pale eyes never leaving the holographic display in front of her. Alien sea life. Exotic, mysterious, and potentially lethal. Just like tourists on spring break. "Wouldn't be much of a meal," Dominic quipped, his fingers dancing over the keyboard with the grace of a drunk walrus. A burst of static cut through the room, sharp as a widow's scream. Isolde's head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "What the hell was that?" "Don't know," Dominic replied, frowning at his screens like they had personally insulted his mother. The third member of their little asylum, Kelly, a biologist with the disposition of a caffeinated scourge, bounced over. "Signal? From where? I thought we were the only lunatics this deep." "We are," Isolde confirmed, leaning closer to the display as if proximity could tame the chaos of the readouts. "But something out there wants our attention. Or maybe it's just lonely." "Well, if it's looking for a friend, it picked the wrong damn place," Dominic grumbled. "I've got enough on my plate without adding interstellar pen pals." Isolde chuckled dryly, her fingers flicking through the layers of data. "Look on the bright side, Dom. Maybe it's a galactic lottery winner come to pull us out of this pit." "A girl can dream," Kelly chimed in, her eyes alight with the kind of hope that only the truly madness-inducing can foster. Their banter was cut short by another jolt, this one more insistent, like a toddler tugging on a sleeve. Alarms blared, red lights painting the room in shades of panic and cursing. "Should we run?" Kelly asked, half serious, half expecting the dome to collapse at any moment. "Only if you can swim through 3 miles of alien-infested water," Isolde replied, pulling up the origin of the signal. It was coming from an area they hadn't mapped, a black spot on their otherwise thorough survey. "Great," Dominic sighed, slumping in his chair. "The Bermuda Triangle of Europa. Could be worse," Isolde said, not entirely convinced. "Could be the Pacific garbage patch of Europa." They shared a grim chuckle, the kind that came when facing the absurdity of life-threatening situations. "All right," Isolde said, clapping her hands together. "Let's go say hello." "You sure?" Dominic asked, eyeing her like she just suggested a quick swim in a piranha pool. "No," she replied, "but it's not like we have anything better to do. Besides, if this place collapses, I'd rather be outside than trapped in here with you." "Love you too, boss," Dominic called after her retreating back. Kelly grabbed her gear, a mix of high-tech gadgets and old-fashioned gumption. "This is gonna be fun." "Depends on your definition," Isolde replied, sealing her helmet and checking its integrity. "But hey, at least we'll have a story to tell." They moved through the dome, steps echoing in the steel corridors like ghosts of failed expeditions past. "I don't know," Kelly said, fiddling with her comms unit. "Mom always said to beware of strangers bearing gifts." "Strangers bearing signals from the abyss," Isolde corrected. "Let's hope they're not the sort to ask for sugar and borrow your lawn mower." They reached the airlock, its oppressive bulk a promise of safety or doom depending on how one viewed it. Isolde keyed in the codes, the door opening with a hiss that suggested imminent doom. "After you," she said, gesturing grandly. Kelly rolled her eyes. "Chivalry's not dead, just misplaced." Outside, Europa's ocean stretched in every direction, a world of blue shadows and lurking mysteries. Their suits were like second skins, clunky but dependable, much like Dominic on a good day. The signal pulsed in their ears, an insistent heartbeat leading them into the unknown. "You ever get the feeling we're in over our heads?" Kelly asked, her voice crackling over the comms. "Every day," Isolde replied, eyes scanning the murky depths. "But at least today we've got a direction." They followed the signal past forests of bioluminescent algae swaying like concertgoers, through canyons cut by ancient waters. The deeper they went, the stranger things became. Fish with eyes too large, teeth too sharp, creatures flickering out of sight like half-remembered dreams. "This is the kind of place you expect to find a lost civilization," Kelly said, her voice hushed with a mix of awe and dread. "Or a monster with a taste for scientists," Isolde added, checking her scanner. "Signals getting stronger, we're close." "What do you think we'll find?" Kelly asked, sounding more excited than concerned. "Probably our doom," Isolde replied cheerfully. "Or if we're lucky, a really good story for the folks back home. Assuming we ever make it back," Kelly quipped. The signal led them to a cavern, its mouth wide and unwelcoming like a lawyer's smile. Inside, the water felt thicker, the shadows darker. Shapes moved at the edges of their lights, curious or predatory or both. "Okay," Isolde said, taking a deep breath, which in her suit felt more like an act of faith than necessity. "Let's see what all the fuss is about." They entered the cavern, lights cutting through the gloom like knives, revealing a world of impossible architecture. Alien, ancient, and undeniably sentient. Structures rose from the seabed, twisting and turning in ways that defied logic and gravity. "Well, this is new," Kelly said, her voice a mix of awe and terror. "New and probably deadly," Isolde replied, scanning the area. "Get your samples and let's get out of here before whatever built this decides to come back." Kelly nodded, moving with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 100 times before, even if the setting was unprecedented. Isolde kept watch, her eyes darting between her partner and the shadows. And then she saw it, a flicker of movement, something large and fast slipping between the alien structures. Kelly," she called, her voice tense. "What?" Kelly looked up, following Isolde's gaze. "Oh, crap." The creature emerged from the shadows, a nightmare of scales and teeth, eyes glowing with a malevolent intelligence that suggested it didn't just want to eat them, it wanted to enjoy it. "Run," Isolde said, the word more instinct than command. They bolted, suits thrumming with borrowed power, the creature in pursuit, a living torpedo with a grudge. They dodged between columns, barely staying ahead, the signal still pounding in their ears like a death knell. "This wasn't in the brochure," Kelly gasped, her breath ragged. "Next time, read the fine print," Isolde shot back, adrenaline sharpening her senses. The cavern walls blurred past, the alien architecture a blur of impossible angles. The exit loomed ahead, a promise of safety or at least a slightly less immediate death. With a final burst of speed, they shot out of the cavern, the creature snapping at their heels like an overzealous tax collector. "Keep going," Isolde yelled, though she didn't need to. Kelly was already ahead, her smaller frame slicing through the water like a knife. They reached the safety of the dome, slamming the airlock shut just as the creature barreled into the transparent wall, a frustrated predator robbed of its meal. For a moment, it stared at them, eyes burning with unspoken promises, before it turned and vanished back into the depths. Panting, they stripped off their helmets, the dome's recycled air tasting like victory. "Well, that was fun," Kelly said, her voice shaking with adrenaline and laughter. Isolde nodded, her heart slowing from its frantic pace. "Yeah, a real blast. Next time, let's try a relaxing vacation in a war zone instead." They laughed together, the sound echoing in the dome, a defiant peal against the darkness outside. The signal still whispered in their ears, a reminder that their discovery was far from over, that Europa held more secrets than they had bargained for. Isolde looked at Kelly, her expression a mix of determination and resignation. "Guess we've got our work cut out for us." "And not just with the paperwork," Kelly replied, eyes bright with the thrill of the unknown. "Nope," Isolde agreed, glancing back at the monitors. "But hey, at least it's never boring." With the signal as their guide, they settled back into the dome, ready to face whatever came next. After all, they were human, and if there was one thing humans were good at, it was surviving the impossible. The air tasted slightly less like recycled misery as Isolde, Kelly, and Dominic gathered in the lunatic asylum's command center, the holographic display flickering like an overworked candle. Dominic had been fiddling with the micro-adjusters on his helmet, mumbling something about how patchwork engineering is the space equivalent of duct tape. "So, what's next?" Kelly asked, bouncing slightly on her heels, clearly still riding the adrenaline high of their recent escapade. "Return trip with postcards and a gift basket," Isolde snorted. "If you're volunteering to hand-deliver them, go right ahead." "I hear alien fauna's all the rage this season," Dominic grunted, his fingers dancing over the console. "I don't know what you two are smiling about. Whatever sent that signal was probably hoping we'd be dinner, or maybe they just want to invite us to their book club," Isolde suggested dryly. Discuss their last culinary read. The signal was still there, an insistent pulse like a teenager blasting music next door, daring them to do something about it. Ignoring it wasn't an option. Too much curiosity and just enough stupidity to leave well enough alone. "So, any ideas?" Kelly asked, leaning on the console, eyes bright with hope or caffeine. Before we get another surprise visit, Isolde rubbed her temples, a futile gesture given the helmet. "We've got to figure out what they want. If they're just curious or if we're on the menu. Maybe they're just as bored as we are," Dominic muttered. "I'd probably harass anyone passing by too if I lived down here." The holographic display shifted, the signal source highlighted like a neon sign screaming, "Here there be monsters." It wasn't far from the cavern they narrowly escaped, adding a layer of urgency that was about as welcome as a flu shot. "All right, let's do this," Isolde said, more to herself than anyone else. "Kelly, you're with me." "Dominic, hold the fort and keep the coffee warm." "Roger that, fearless leader," Dominic said, his voice thick with sarcasm. "Try not to get eaten." "Funny," Kelly added, checking her gear with the practiced ease of someone who still expected everything to fail spectacularly. "I thought you'd want us to get eaten so you could have more legroom." "Tempting, but no thanks," Dominic replied, waving them off. "I'd get lonely down here without your constant chatter." Back in the suits, the world shrank down to the sound of breath and the thrum of their own pulse. Exciting, if you were the sort who found thrill in potentially fatal outings under miles of ice. They slipped back into the water, the dome's airlock sealing behind them with a noise that felt far too final. The route to the signal wasn't long, but each meter felt like walking into a boxing ring blindfolded. "Let's hope the welcoming committee's on a coffee break," Kelly remarked, her voice crackling over the comms. "Or at least that they've switched to decaf," Isolde agreed, keeping her eyes peeled for signs of trouble. But instead of an ambush they found watchers. Dozens of alien creatures, all eyes and scales, studied them from the shadows, like a jury waiting to deliver a verdict. It was unsettling, like being the unwitting star of a nature documentary. They're not attacking," Kelly observed, her tone a mix of confusion and relief. Yet, Isolde added, cautiously moving forward. The creatures tracked their movements with an eerie synchronicity, their eyes reflecting the lights from their suits. "Maybe they're just here to see what all the fuss is about, or they're planning the main course," Kelly replied, pulling out a scanner. "Let's get this done before they change their minds." The signal source was nestled among a series of alien structures, all impossible angles and unnerving beauty. The alien architecture looked more like a twisted art exhibit than anything with a practical use. "Looks like an alien IKEA showroom," Kelly said, her scanner beeping reassuringly. "But for the life of me, I can't figure out how to assemble it. Instructions probably warn against humans," Isolde replied, focusing on the signal. "Let's see what's so important." The The signal device was a strange amalgamation of organic and mechanical, pulsing with a rhythm that was almost hypnotic. It was the kind of thing marketers would kill to replicate for a new tech gadget. As Isolde worked, Kelly kept a wary eye on their audience. The creatures remained still, curious but not aggressive, like cats watching an unfamiliar toy. "Think they're the welcoming committee?" Kelly asked, her voice more playful than concerned. "Or maybe we're their reality show." "Let's hope it's not the elimination round," Isolde replied, finally managing to access the signal's data. "Looks like coordinates, or a pattern." "Can't tell." Kelly leaned over, squinting at the display. "Think it's an invitation or a trap," Isolde said, saving the data. "But it's definitely got something to do with us. Wanna bet it leads somewhere even more inviting than this?" Kelly asked, gesturing at the surreal architecture surrounding them. "I'm not much for gambling," Isolde said, with a dry smile. "Not with stakes this high." The creatures still hadn't made a move as they finished their work. A small blessing, considering their teeth looked capable of turning steel into confetti. "All right, let's head back," Isolde said, already turning back towards the dome. "I'd rather not push our luck." They retraced their path, the alien creatures watching with an intensity that felt almost intelligent, like they were weighing decisions or contemplating the best way to approach a problem. "Feels like they're smarter than we thought," Kelly commented, glancing back one last time. "Or just more patient," Isolde said. "Either way, I'd prefer to keep this a long-distance relationship." Back in the dome, Dominic greeted them with his usual brand of enthusiasm. "Welcome back. Still in one piece, I see. Disappointed?" Kelly asked, shrugging out of her suit and feeling the chill of the dome's air. "Not at all," Dominic replied, smirking. "I just prefer my coworkers alive. Less paperwork that way." They gathered around the control center, the signal data displayed like a jigsaw puzzle missing half its pieces. "So what do we have?" Dominic asked, peering at the screen like it might actually start making sense. "Coordinates, maybe a map," Isolde explained, pointing at the patterns. "Whatever it is, it's important to them." "Think they're playing a game?" Kelly asked, leaning in. "Like cosmic chess if they are. We're the pawns," Isolde said. "And I bet they're playing to win." Dominic tapped the screen thoughtfully. "So, what's the plan? Follow the breadcrumb trail or keep our heads down?" "If we keep our heads down, we'll just get buried," Isolde said, rubbing her temples again. "But if we follow it, we might find out what they want, or we might end up as an appetizer," Dominic pointed out, ever the pessimist. "True," Isolde agreed. "But at least then we'd know who's invited to dinner." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their decision pressing down like the ice above. Finally, Isolde broke the tension with a shrug. "What the hell? It's not like we signed up for a safe job." Kelly grinned, the kind of smile that said she'd been hoping for that answer. "Well, it's not adventure until someone's regretting it." "Exactly," Isolde said, feeling the familiar rush of reckless optimism. "Let's get some sleep. Tomorrow we follow the signal." Dominic rolled his eyes, but there was a hint of a smile there too. "Fine, but you owe me a drink if this goes south." "Deal," Isolde said, knowing full well they'd probably all need one anyway. They dispersed to their quarters, the dome feeling emptier despite its cramped quarters. Sleep came slowly, interrupted by dreams of alien eyes and twisted architecture. The kind of dreams that left you more tired than before, but at least they weren't nightmares. Not yet. Morning, if you could call it that in a place with no sun, came too soon. They gathered again, their gear ready, the signal still pulsing with its siren call. "All set?" Isolde asked, her voice steady despite the nerves simmering underneath. "Ready as I'll ever be," Kelly replied, her hands steady as she checked her equipment. Dominic nodded, his usual grumble absent. "Let's get this over with. I've got a nap scheduled for later." They suited up, the routine a comforting cloak against the unknown. The airlock opened with its familiar hiss, and they slipped back into the ocean, the world shrinking again to the sound of breath and heartbeats. The signal led them deeper, past familiar landmarks and into territories where the bioluminescent life painted the water in ghostly hues. It should have been beautiful, but all Isolde could think about was what might be hiding in those shadows. Keep your eyes peeled, Isolde instructed, her voice low. No telling what's out here. On it, Kelly confirmed, her eyes scanning the depths like a hawk. Dominic brought up the rear, his usual grumbling replaced by focused silence. A rare state for him, which made Isolde more anxious than she'd like to admit. The new location was different from the cavern, less abandoned ruins and more active installation. Structures hummed with energy, the water vibrating with a strange life of its own. Looks like they've upgraded, Kelly joked, though her voice betrayed a hint of awe. Hope they added a guest room. Let's not overstay our welcome, Isolde advised, moving forward. There was a tension in the water, a feeling that something significant was about to happen. As they approached the central structure, the creatures appeared again, their eyes watching, unblinking. But this time there was a presence, an awareness that seemed to ripple through them like a collective mind. "Okay, that's new," Dominic said, voice tight with unease. "They're not attacking," Kelly observed, though she didn't sound reassured. "Maybe they're just curious, or they're sizing us up," Isolde replied, stopping just short of the structure. The signal was here, stronger than ever, a beacon just waiting to be acknowledged. A low hum filled the water and the creatures parted, revealing a node at the heart of the structure, pulsating with energy. It was both a challenge and an invitation. "Well," Isolde said, taking a deep breath. "Let's see what they have to say." They moved closer, the creatures watching them with an intensity that was almost palpable. As they reached out to the node, the signal changed, a cascade of images and sounds flooding their senses. It was a story, a history of the creatures and their world, a world they sought to share, to expand. They weren't invaders. They were planners, architects of a future that included humanity, if humanity could prove worthy. "Looks like they're offering us a job," Kelly said, voice hushed. "Or a place in their zoo," Dominic added, ever the skeptic. Isolde absorbed the information, the truth sinking in like a lead weight. "They want to domesticate us," she said, the realization bitter in her mouth. "Well," Kelly replied, forcing a smile. "At least we'll have a story to tell." "Assuming we live to tell it," Isolde agreed, the weight of their discovery settling around them like a shroud. Back at the dome, they debriefed in silence, the implications of the signal's message heavy in the air. They were part of something bigger now, something they hadn't signed up for but couldn't walk away from. "Guess it's time to decide whose side we're on," Dominic said, breaking the silence. "Yeah," Isolde agreed, her voice steady but her heart racing. "Guess it is." They sat together, the darkness pressing in as they prepared for the next step. The signal pulsed in their minds, a reminder of what lay ahead, a challenge they couldn't ignore. Because in the end, if there was one thing humans were good at, it was defying expectations, even alien ones. The Lunatic Asylum, a name that was a little too on the nose for a place that was only slightly less stable than a house of cards in a hurricane. Underneath Europa's icy crust, it continued to hum like an overworked, underpaid drone, its inhabitants feeling more like inmates with each passing day. Isolde Thorn stood at the holographic display, the flickering light cutting through the gloom like a flashlight in a coal mine. The signal was still there, pulsing with the persistence of a toddler demanding attention, and just about as annoying. "More of them are showing up," Dominic announced, his voice a mix of irritation and resignation. His micro-adjusters were clamped on his helmet, making him look like a cyborg with a penchant for steampunk cosplay. "If I didn't know better, I'd say they're planning a block party." "A block party? More like a hostile takeover," Kelly chimed in, sipping what might be coffee but was probably some concoction strong enough to dissolve nails. Her optimism, as always, was powered by sheer caffeine and denial. "We've got to communicate," Isolde said, her gaze fixed on the slowly forming pattern of alien bodies on the screen. "Before they decide we're better off as a new species of pet." "Pets don't have to pay taxes," Dominic quipped, eyes narrowing at the display. "Might be an upgrade." "Only if you like being house-trained," Kelly retorted, shooting him a grin that was a little too wide. The creatures had multiplied, filling the holographic display with shifting forms that seemed to pulse with a strange, alien rhythm. It was like watching a lava lamp on steroids. They were organizing now, their movements more deliberate, more calculated. The way sharks circle before they decide your dinner. Dominance behavior, Isolde muttered, her mind churning through the possibilities. They're asserting themselves. Trying to show us who's boss. Great, Dominic said, rubbing the back of his neck. Just what we need, more overlords. It's like they have a union, Kelly added, watching the creatures intently. And we're about to negotiate our severance packages. Let's hope they at least offer dental, Isolde said, not entirely joking. She was already concocting a plan, a way to engage with these creatures without ending up as a chew toy. We need to let them know we're not just another species to be bulldozed. How do you propose we do that? Dominic asked, crossing his arms. Send them an intergalactic fruit basket. Think more along the lines of an olive branch, Isolde replied, tapping her fingers against the side of the holographic display. We show them we're not just meat sacks with a penchant for bad decisions. Good luck with that last part, Dominic grumbled, though there was a hint of grudging admiration in his voice. Any bright ideas on how we avoid becoming intergalactic roadkill? Kelly inquired, voice buoyant with the kind of reckless enthusiasm that usually preceded a catastrophic failure. We need to understand their technology, Isolde said, her mind racing. They're not just animals, they're architects of their own destiny. We need to show them we're capable of the same. By playing with their tech, Dominic asked, eyebrows raised. Sounds a bit like poking a bear with a stick. Poking a bear is better than getting eaten by one, Isolde pointed out. We need to learn their language, their systems. Show them we can adapt. Adapt or die, Kelly said, nodding. Story of our lives, right? Pretty much, Isolde agreed, a wry smile tugging at her lips. Human history was littered with tales of survival against the odds. This was just another chapter, albeit with more tentacles than usual. The creatures outside the dome moved with a grace that was unsettling in its precision. They formed patterns, shapes that hinted at a language far beyond the grasp of simple sounds and gestures. A language of form and motion, of presence and absence. Looks like they're writing us a very large, very wet telegram, Kelly observed, watching the display. Hope it doesn't say, "Dear humans, get lost." We need to respond, Isolde insisted. They're not just making noise. They're communicating, probably telling us how much they enjoy fresh meat. How do you answer a message like that? Dominic asked, his skepticism a comforting constant. Send back a postcard that says "Wish you were here." More like "Please don't eat us," Kelly suggested with a grin. We need to show them we're more than prey, Isolde said, ignoring their banter. We need to demonstrate intelligence, creativity, resilience. So, basically the opposite of your average politician, Dominic remarked. Exactly, Isolde replied dryly. We need to hack their system, show them we're not just clever monkeys. We've got to prove we're players in this game. All right, Dominic said, a spark of interest in his eyes. I'm in. But if we end up on the menu, I'm blaming you, Doctor. Thorn, fair enough, Isolde conceded. Let's get to work. They spent hours dissecting the signal, their minds working in tandem like a well-oiled machine, or at least one that had a few too many cups of coffee and a severe disdain for being told no. These patterns, Kelly said, pointing at the swirling shapes on the display. They're more than random. There's a logic here, a sequence. Think of it like a puzzle, Isolde said, her voice calm but tense. If we can crack it, we might just find a way to talk to them. Talk. More like beg for our lives, Dominic muttered, but he was already focused on the task. They worked through the night, the dome silent save for the occasional creak of metal and the hum of electronics. It was a symphony of survival, the notes written in code and desperation. Finally, as the artificial morning light began to filter through the dome's sparse windows, they had something resembling a breakthrough. A sequence of shapes and colors that seemed to echo the alien patterns. Looks like we've got something, Dominic said, stifling a yawn. Hopefully they don't send back a cease and desist. Let's send it, Isolde said, her heart racing. And hope they don't see it as an invitation to dinner. They transmitted the sequence, the signal pulsing out into the watery depths like a message in a bottle. Then they waited, tension coiling around them like a strangler fig. The creatures responded quickly, their movements slowing, shifting. It was like a conversation, a dance of shapes and signals that spoke of more than simple survival. "They're responding," Kelly whispered, awe in her voice. "I think they're acknowledging us. Or maybe they're just deciding which sauce goes best with human," Dominic said, though his voice lacked its usual bite. Isolde watched the display, hope flaring in her chest. They'd made contact, however tenuous. But with it came the realization that they were part of something far bigger than any of them had imagined. The aliens' intentions were becoming clearer. They wanted integration, an expansion of their hierarchy, a merger of species, a collaboration, or more accurately, a takeover with benefits. "Looks like they are offering a corporate merger," Isolde said, her voice dry. "With us as the junior partners. So what you're saying is, we're screwed," Dominic summarized. "Probably," Isolde agreed. "But at least we get a vote, sort of. Better than nothing," Kelly said. "Besides, who wouldn't want to be part of an alien conglomerate? Someone who enjoys free will," Dominic suggested. As they gathered around the holographic display, the weight of their situation pressed down on them. The aliens were intelligent, vastly so. Their technology outstripped humanity's in ways that were both awe-inspiring and terrifying. "We're in over our heads," Isolde admitted, the enormity of it all settling in. "But we've got to show them we can adapt. Otherwise, we're just another species in their zoo." "Adapt or die," Kelly said again, though this time her voice held a note of defiance. "Let's just hope it's not both," Dominic added, his usual sarcasm tinged with a hint of genuine concern. The creatures continued to move, their patterns shifting and evolving as if testing the humans, assessing their worthiness. It was a game of chess where the stakes were survival itself. "Time to make our next move," Isolde said, her determination renewed. "Let's show them what humans are made of. Mostly water and poor decisions, last I checked," Dominic quipped, but he was already scanning the display for new possibilities. Together they faced the unknown, their path uncertain but their resolve unwavering. Because if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was turning the tables, even in the darkest of times. And this time, the universe was watching. And maybe, just maybe, it would learn that humans were a bit harder to domesticate than it thought. "Doctor." Isolde Thorne squinted at the holographic display, her mind racing faster than a politician running from accountability. The aliens were doing more than sending pretty pictures. They were poking their slimy fingers into the lunatic asylum systems. The dome shivered as if acknowledging it had been caught with its circuits down. "What the hell are they doing now?" Dominic asked, his voice the equivalent of a sigh with words. He adjusted the micro-adjusters on his helmet like someone continuously fiddling with a loose tooth. "Are they redecorating our systems for us? Because I prefer my life support to not be avant-garde. They're like those neighbors who borrow your tools and never give them back," Isolde muttered, pinching the bridge of her nose. "So, like regular neighbors," Kelly chimed in, pouring another cup of her coffee-like sludge with the enthusiasm of someone pretending it tasted less like battery acid. On the display, the alien patterns had morphed again, lines and curves intersecting in complex dances that hinted at a deeper understanding of their environment. It was a bit like watching a toddler trying to operate a smartphone, except this toddler had access to their life support systems. "We need to cut them off," Isolde said, a plan forming in her mind as jagged and unreliable as a cheap hoverboard. "How?" Dominic asked, leaning forward. "We can't exactly throw a blanket over them and hope they get bored. Maybe we can confuse them," Isolde suggested. "Send them a signal that scrambles their tech. We need to outsmart them." "Great," Dominic said, sarcasm dripping from his voice like a leaky faucet. "Because there's nothing aliens love more than a surprise quiz." Kelly grinned. "If we fail, Guess we know what we'll be eating for dinner. Us, Isold deadpanned, typing furiously at the console. Not high on my list of culinary experiences, thanks. The room went quiet, the gravity of their situation settling over them like an unwelcome blanket. The aliens were more than just curious tourists. They were technologically advanced enough to treat the dome like their personal playground. We don't have much time, Isold said, pulling up system diagnostics. If they decide to shut off our air for a laugh, we're screwed. More screwed than we are now, Dominic quipped, but his hands were already moving over his terminal. Let's hope whoever designed this place wasn't a sadist, Kelly sighed, staring at the display as if it held the secrets of the universe. Or at least the secret to surviving one more day. The air hung thick with tension and the smell of burnt circuits. Isolde could almost taste the anxiety, sharp and metallic like the tang of fear in the back of her throat. The dome was their fortress, but it was also their prison. Now it was being turned against them, and that was just rude. Okay, try this, Isolde said, sending a cascade of commands into the system. It's a dummy signal. Should confuse their input long enough for us to get some control back. Should, Dominic echoed, his skepticism as tangible as the dome's cold, unyielding walls. Kelly gave them a thumbs up, her optimism poking through the gloom like a daisy in a minefield. Let's hope they get distracted by it. Like cats with a laser pointer, or humans with a sail on bad decisions, Isolde murmured, focusing on the screen. Initiating now. The command flared to life, a burst of data rippling outwards like an electric shock through the system. The dome's lights flickered, dimming as if to punctuate the sheer uncertainty of their plan. It was like trying to swat a fly with a sledgehammer, messy and unlikely to work, but at least they were trying. They're responding, Dominic said, watching the display. The alien patterns shifted, hesitating for a moment like they were scratching their metaphorical heads. Either they're confused or they're deciding if we're more trouble than we're worth, Isolde noted, her voice laced with dry humor. The aliens' movements halted, a temporary respite in the ongoing dance of dominance. It was a small victory, but out here, even the tiniest wins felt monumental. They've stopped messing with our systems, Kelly breathed, relief plain in her voice. Nice to know even aliens hate pop quizzes. Isolde's shoulders relaxed a fraction. We bought ourselves some time. Probably not enough to build them a friendship bracelet, but enough to figure out our next move. Let's hope it's not our last move, Dominic added, eyeing the display with the wariness of a man examining a ticking bomb. The dome was quiet for now, but Isolde knew it was only a matter of time before the aliens resumed their tinkering. The unpredictability of their intentions hung over them like a storm cloud, promising more trouble than any of them could handle. We need to plan, Isolde said, pulling up schematics of the dome. Figure out how to reinforce our systems, make it harder for them to poke their tentacles in. Preferably without turning into space popsicles, Kelly added, rubbing her arms for warmth. Right, Isolde replied, already formulating the next steps. Let's see how we can jury-rig some defenses. Dominic raised an eyebrow. With what, spit and good intentions? Pretty much, Isolde admitted, flashing a grin. But good intentions are in short supply around here. The three of them got to work. It was a desperate scramble, like trying to bail out a sinking ship with a broken teacup. But if human history had taught them anything, it was that being stubborn often worked out in the end. They patched together a makeshift firewall using salvaged tech and a few creative rewrites, the electronic equivalent of duct tape and bubble gum. It was a testament to human ingenuity, or stupidity, depending on how you looked at it. Let's just hope they don't see through this too quickly, Dominic muttered, wiping a smudge off his cheek. It's not exactly Fort Knox. More like Fort Knots, Kelly quipped, leaning back in her chair with a satisfied sigh. The dome had stopped shuddering, a temporary truce in the battle for control. The alien patterns on the display were still, a momentary lull that could mean anything from retreat to regrouping. Think we bought ourselves a little peace? Kelly asked, hopeful. Peace? In this universe? Isolde snorted. Don't make me laugh, it might break the system again. Dominic chuckled, a sound that was more relief than amusement. Well, at least we're alive to bitch about it. That's something. The three of them shared a weary smile, the camaraderie of shared struggle binding them together in ways that went beyond mere survival. What now? Kelly asked, looking between them. Now, Isolde said, rubbing her eyes, we rest, and we prepare. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the universe never does you the favor of falling apart when you're ready for it. The dome hummed softly, the sounds of machinery settling into a quieter rhythm. Outside, the aliens lingered, their presence a constant reminder of the precarious balance they lived on. Here's to hoping the universe cuts us a break, Dominic said, raising an imaginary glass. The room, despite its grim setting and uncertain future, felt a little lighter. Because if they were going to face the end, they'd do it with eyes wide open and a joke on their lips. It was the human way, after all. And maybe, just maybe, it would be enough to see them through to another day. The dome was about as welcoming as a jail cell made of ice, shaking and groaning like it had a bad hangover. Doctor. Isolde Thorne ran her fingers through her hair, which had started to resemble a rat's nest, courtesy of the constant tension. Well, this is comforting, she muttered, glaring at the failing life support systems like they'd personally offended her. Dominic leaned back in his chair, feet propped up on a console as if this was all a front row seat to his favorite disaster movie. Hey, at least we won't have to worry about global warming down here, he said, casting a wry glance at the temperature readout, which was plummeting faster than their morale. Trying to look on the bright side, are we? Kelly smirked, her nose wrinkling at her sludge cup which had started to congeal into something resembling a war crime. Because I hear frozen corpses are all the rage on Europa. Great. We can be trendsetters, Isolde snapped, smacking the console as if the force of her frustration could fix it. Seriously, what do these aliens want? Our secrets to making terrible coffee, Dominic shrugged, adjusting his micro-adjusters with the finesse of a man too tired to care. Maybe they're just bored. I've seen cats do worse just for a laugh. At this rate, I'd welcome a cat invasion, Kelly sighed, rubbing her arms against the cold. At least they purr. The lights flickered again, casting sinister shadows that danced in the corners of the room like they were celebrating someone's impending doom. The hum of machinery was punctuated by the occasional alarming clunk, like a mechanic under the hood of a car that had given up the will to live. I think we need to talk about our options, Isolde said, her voice as flat as the planet's surface above. Before we're turned into human popsicles, would you like to discuss the weather or our impending doom first? Dominic asked, the sarcasm in his voice sharp enough to cut through the gloom. Kelly snorted. I vote for doom. Makes for a more interesting conversation. Isolde pulled up the system diagnostics, her eyes scanning for anything resembling hope. Seriously, though. We need to consider surrender. The room went so quiet you could almost hear the sound of collective disbelief. Surrender. It hung in the air like a curse, the last refuge for people out of luck and out of time. Surrender, Dominic said, his incredulity as thick as the dome walls. You mean like, give up and let them experiment on us like lab rats? More like, hope they have better negotiation skills than their sense of humor, Isolde replied, her hands resting on the console, which had long stopped providing any reassurance. Kelly looked between them, her usual mirth taking a backseat to a more serious contemplation. What happens if we do nothing? We freeze, suffocate, or get dissected, Isolde said bluntly. Not necessarily in that order. Well, when you put it that way, sounds almost like a spa day, Dominic muttered, rubbing his temples as if trying to massage away the absurdity of their predicament. Isolde pinched the bridge of her nose, frustration bubbling beneath her calm facade. Look, I'm not saying surrender is what I want, but we need to consider every option. Every bad option, Kelly corrected, shooting a look at the flickering lights that was equal parts dread and defiance. Why do I feel like we're in a horror movie where the monster is the house itself? Because we are, Dominic said, the corners of his mouth twitching into a humorless smile. And the scriptwriters are sadists with no sense of decency. Isold's gaze returned to the holographic display, now a mosaic of static and garbled signals. She frowned, leaning in closer as something caught her eye, a flicker of coherence in the chaos, like a moment of clarity in a particularly bad fever dream. "Wait a minute," she murmured, fingers dancing over the controls. "I think I've found something." "Is it the secret to eternal life?" Dominic asked, not even bothering to hide his skepticism. "Better," Isold replied, excitement creeping into her voice. "A potential weakness in their communications." Kelly perked up, her interest piqued. "You mean not all their tech is perfect?" "Seems like their signal has a pattern," Isold explained, pointing at the screen. "They're not expecting interference. If we can tap into it, we might be able to disrupt their control." "So, a giant middle finger to their plans," Dominic said, straightening in his chair. "That I can get behind." Kelly grinned, for once sharing in Dominic's enthusiasm. "Hey, if it means not ending up in an alien zoo, count me in." Isold's mind raced, a plan forming in the chaos like a life raft appearing amidst a sea of despair. "We need to transmit a counter-signal, something that'll make their systems think twice about poking around in Iors." "Think we have enough duct tape to pull that off?" Kelly quipped, already moving to her terminal with newfound determination. "If not, I'm sure we can MacGyver something," Dominic said, cracking his knuckles. "Worst case, we fry their circuits and Iors in a blaze of glory." "Here's hoping for less blaze, more glory," Isold said, a wry smile tugging at her lips as she set to work. The dome creaked ominously, as if aware of the humans' renewed vigor. They moved with purpose now, the threat of surrender momentarily forgotten as they focused on their new objective. The weight of their earlier despair lifted, replaced by a grim determination that was as much a part of them as their need to breathe. They cobbled together a jerry-rigged signal disruptor, a patchwork of wires and salvaged components that should have belonged in a scrapyard rather than a critical piece of life-saving equipment. But as they worked, the dark humor that had been their constant companion returned, a lifeline in the sea of uncertainty. "Think the aliens will appreciate our creativity?" Kelly asked, her fingers flying over the controls. "If they have any taste, they'll give us a participation trophy," Dominic replied, eyes locked on the display. Isold chuckled, shaking her head as she made the final adjustments. "Or they'll just vaporize us for being a nuisance." Optimism. "I like it," Kelly said, shooting Isold a thumbs up. The signal disruptor whirred to life, an electronic growl that filled the room with its presence. The data streamed outwards, a digital middle finger aimed squarely at the heart of their alien tormentors. It was far from perfect, a gamble that could as easily fail as succeed. But it was theirs, and it was something. "They're reacting," Dominic said, eyes darting between the readings as the alien patterns on the display shifted like a startled flock of birds. "Good or bad?" Kelly asked, chewing on her lip. "Who knows?" Dominic shrugged. "Maybe they're just confused. Or maybe they're plotting our untimely demise." "Sounds like a typical Friday night," Isold muttered, monitoring the system's response. The dome held its breath, every creak and groan amplified in the silence. The alien signals danced erratically, a chaotic ballet that suggested they were, indeed, puzzled by the humans' audacity. "Looks like we're harder to domesticate than they thought," Isold said, satisfaction coloring her voice. "Here's to being the universe's most stubborn pests," Dominic added, raising an imaginary toast. Kelly joined in, her smile genuine despite the circumstances. "I'll drink to that." "As soon as we get something better than sludge." A crackle of static burst from the speakers, a garbled symphony of alien sounds that were both menacing and oddly comical. It was a reminder that while they'd won a battle, the war was far from over. "Think they're trying to talk back?" Kelly wondered aloud. "Either that or they're ordering takeout," Dominic quipped, his fingers flying over his keyboard as he attempted to interpret the signals. Isold shook her head, eyes fixed on the display. Whatever it is, it means they're not ignoring us anymore. Let's hope they're not the type to hold grudges, Kelly said, injecting some levity into the tension-filled room. The dome settled into an uneasy calm, the machineries hum a backdrop to the humans' renewed resolve. They had bought themselves time, a precious commodity in a place where every second counted. It wasn't much, but it was enough to spark the tiniest ember of hope. "Now what?" Dominic asked, glancing between his crewmates. "Now we regroup," Isolde replied, determination setting her jaw. "Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the universe doesn't play fair, but neither do we." The three of them shared a determined look, a silent agreement to face whatever came next head-on. They were, after all, human. Obstinate, reckless, and stubbornly refusing to go down without a fight. "And maybe," Isolde added, "just maybe, we can show the universe that we're not just insects to be squashed. We're annoyingly resilient cockroaches." The room was still cold, the future uncertain. But for a moment at least they weren't just surviving, they were living. And that in itself felt like a victory. "Here's to cockroaches," Kelly said, raising her sludge cup in salute. "To cockroaches," Dominic echoed, grinning despite himself. Isolde nodded, a rare smile gracing her features. "Let's show them what a real infestation looks like." And with that they turned back to their work, the future uncertain but their resolve as steadfast as the stars themselves. Because in a universe that never gave them a break, they were the ones who made their own damn luck. "Doctor." Isolde Thorne stood at the holographic display, her eyes flickering over the garbled alien signals with the intensity of someone trying to decipher a particularly nasty crossword puzzle. It was the kind of focus that made you forget your coffee had gone cold, or in their case, that they were mere ticks away from becoming human popsicles under Europa's icy crust. "All right," she muttered, mostly to herself. "We've got a plan. We've got determination. Now all we need is a miracle and a beer." Dominic, lounging at his post like he was watching a Sunday matinee, shot a wry glance her way. "You forgot about the duct tape and chewing gum. I heard Mac Jiver did wonders with less." "Yeah, and he didn't have aliens screwing with his thermostat," Kelly chimed in, her fingers dancing over her console like a pianist at a recital for the damned. Isolde allowed herself a tight-lipped smile. "True, but he didn't have us either. I'd say that's a fair trade." Dominic chuckled, the sound dry as old bones. "I don't know about you, but I think these aliens just might have a taste for undercooked human. We could be the dish of the day." "Dom," Kelly said, not even bothering to hide her sarcasm, "if you keep that up, I'm going to nominate you as the appetizer." The gentle ribbing was as much a part of their survival strategy as the hastily cobbled-together signal disruptor. It was a dance of sorts, a defiant waltz on the edge of a precipice, where the sheer absurdity of their situation was enough to make them laugh, if only to stop from crying. "The disruptor's ready," Isolde announced, her voice steady, carrying the weight of authority that belied the chaos swirling around them. "We've got one shot at this. If we screw up, we're back to square one, which isn't exactly cozy." "Cozy's overrated," Dominic said, standing up and stretching with a languid grace that seemed out of place against the metallic cold of the command center. Kelly tossed him a glare that could have frozen fire. "Get serious for a second, would you? This isn't a game." "Isn't it?" Dominic shot back, his grin as sharp as a knife. "High stakes, sinister forces, and the chance for an explosive finale. Sounds like prime-time entertainment to me." Isolde shook her head, her patience tested but unyielding. "Enough banter. Let's get this done. If we succeed, we can bicker over who gets to write the screenplay." The dome groaned again, a sound that had become the soundtrack of their lives, like a giant creature shifting uneasily in its sleep. It was a reminder of the fragility of their existence, hanging by a thread that could snap with the slightest provocation. "I'll take the signal disruptor online," Kelly said, focus sharpening like the edge of a blade. "Let's hope our uninvited guests enjoy a little static in their diet. Throw in some white noise for extra flavor," Dominic added, his hands moving with precision over his terminal. eyes locked on the display as if challenging it to misbehave. Isolde watched them with a mixture of pride and trepidation. They were her team, her family in this frozen hell, and if they were going down, they were doing it on their terms. "Ready?" she asked, her voice steady, belying the flutter of nerves in her chest. "As I'll ever be," Kelly replied, her fingers poised over the controls like a pianist about to play their swan song. "Do it," Isolde commanded, and the room held its breath, machinery and humans alike pausing as if the universe itself had taken notice. The signal disruptor roared to life, a chorus of defiance that blasted outwards, carrying the imprint of human ingenuity and stubbornness. It wasn't pretty, but it was theirs, a middle finger to the cosmic void that had dared to intrude upon their little corner of existence. The lights flickered ominously, a stuttering heartbeat that matched the pounding in Isolde's chest. For a moment, the universe seemed to hold still, as if contemplating the audacity of these tiny creatures daring to challenge the grand design. "Anything?" Kelly asked, her voice taut with anticipation, eyes glued to the screen where alien signals danced like fireflies in a storm. "Just give it a second," Dominic said, his tone an infuriating mix of calm and indifference. Even aliens need time to figure out they're being punked. The seconds stretched into eternity, each heartbeat a countdown to either triumph or disaster. Then slowly, agonizingly, the alien patterns began to shift, the chaotic ballet morphing into a confused, erratic shuffle. "They're reacting," Isolde said, her voice a whisper, as if afraid to disturb the fragile equilibrium they had created. "We've got their attention. Hope they like what they see," Kelly muttered, her skepticism barely masked by a veneer of bravado. Dominic snorted. "If they don't, they can take it up with customer service. Oh wait, that's us." The alien signals continued to flutter and flail, a testament to the chaos they had wrought. It was working. For how long, they couldn't say, but in that moment they had the upper hand. "Okay, what now?" Kelly asked, glancing between her crewmates, her usual sarcasm tempered by a flicker of genuine concern. "Now we keep it going," Isolde replied, determination etched into every line of her face. "We buy ourselves time, keep them off balance, and figure out our next move." "Let's hope they're not quick learners," Dominic said, fingers still dancing over his keypad, his eyes never leaving the display. The dome around them shivered again, a reminder that while they might have won a battle, the war was far from over. But they'd taken the first step, and that was something. "I think," Kelly said, a hint of a smile creeping back onto her lips, "they might just be as annoyed with us as we are with them." "Good," Isolde said, allowing herself a brief moment of satisfaction. "Annoyance means we're still in the game." Dominic nodded, his usual flippancy giving way to a rare moment of sincerity. "Here's to being the universe's most irritating pests. And here's to playing this damned game on our terms," Isolde added, her voice carrying a steely resolve that was contagious. They turned back to their work, the flicker of hope burning brighter in the cold, oppressive space. They were humans, stubborn, irreverent, and gloriously defiant. And they weren't about to let a bunch of extraterrestrial bullies call checkmate without one hell of a fight. As they worked, their banter continued, a constant stream of sarcasm and gallows humor that kept the darkness at bay. It was their armor, their weapon, and their lifeline. "And when this is over," Kelly said, her tone light despite the gravity of their situation, "we're getting the hell off this ice ball and finding a nice, sunny beach somewhere." Dominic laughed, a rich, genuine sound that echoed in the command center. "I'll drink to that. Just as long as the drinks are cold and the company's warm." Isolde allowed herself a small smile, the weight of leadership momentarily lightened by the camaraderie of her team. "Right now, I'll settle for survival. The rest we can figure out later." "Survival," Dominic echoed, raising an imaginary toast, "and making sure the universe knows we won't go down easy." The command center fell into a focused silence, the only sounds the rhythmic tapping of keys and the steady hum of the signal disruptor. They were in the eye of the storm, but for the first time they weren't just reacting. They were acting, pushing back against the tide of inevitability. And as the alien signals continued to writhe and waver, they knew that whatever happened next, they would face it together, united in their refusal to be silenced. "Let's get to work," Isolde said, her voice a rallying cry for the weary, the determined, and the defiant. And so they did, the team of humans who refused to be anything less than a force to be reckoned with, even in the vast, indifferent expanse of space. They worked with the knowledge that they'd written their own script, and for better or worse, they would see it through to the end. As long as they had each other and their irrepressible spirit, they would fight on, cockroaches in the cosmos, with no intention of being squashed. The command center buzzed with a nervous energy, the kind you might find in a dodgy bar just before the inevitable brawl breaks out over a spilled drink. Dr. Isolde Thorne, ever the reluctant ringleader, stood at the holographic display like a general surveying a battlefield made up of blinking lights and alien gibberish. Her team flanked her, ready to unleash their latest scientific Hail Mary, a signal disruptor designed to send the pesky aliens packing. "Think it'll work?" Dominic asked, leaning back in his chair with the kind of casual indifference you'd expect from someone asking about the weather, rather than the potential doom hanging over their heads. "Does it matter?" Kelly replied, her voice a mix of sarcasm and annoyance. "If it doesn't, we're about to become very expensive ice sculptures." Isolde fought the urge to slap both of them, not because they didn't deserve it, but because she needed them alive and functioning for at least the next 10 minutes. "Let's stay focused," she said instead, her words carrying the weight of desperation and resolve. The dome groaned again, that unsettling creak of metal under duress. It was a constant reminder that their little slice of boredom 3 miles deep under Europa's crust was about as stable as a politician's promise. "All right, Kelly, fire it up," Isolde commanded, eyes fixed on the chaotic dance of alien signals. "Let's see if we can't fry some extraterrestrial brains." Kelly's fingers danced over her console like she was playing a concerto, albeit one composed by a madman. The disruptor came to life with a low hum, the sound climbing in pitch and intensity until it was a scream of defiance against the universe's natural order, or more specifically, the order the aliens were trying to impose. "Here goes nothing," Kelly muttered, her words swallowed by the disruptor's whine. The effect was immediate and spectacular. The alien signals on the display began to flicker, their orderly patterns unraveling like a cheap sweater caught on a jagged nail. It was chaos, the good kind, the kind that suggested the aliens were out there scratching their metaphorical heads, trying to figure out just what the hell was going on. "Look at that," Dominic said, unable to hide the glee in his voice. "It's like watching a toddler trying to figure out a Rubik's Cube," Kelly snorted. "More like watching a toddler try not to wet themselves." Isolde allowed herself a brief smile. It was working. Against all odds, their ragtag disruptor was doing its job, throwing the alien hierarchy into a tailspin. The signals flailed and floundered, a digital manifestation of a tantrum, and it was glorious. "Keep it up," she urged, her voice a rallying cry. "We might just pull this off." The room was electric with a mix of tension and triumph. They could do this. They could actually do this. "Think they'll pack up and leave?" Dominic asked, his tone mocking and hopeful all at once. "Maybe," Isolde replied, scratching her chin thoughtfully. "Or maybe they'll come down here and ask us very nicely to cut it out." Kelly laughed, the sound brittle but genuine. "Yeah, right. Aliens with manners. That'll be the day." The signals continued to falter, the alien coordination unraveling like a spool of thread kicked down a stairwell. It was a beautiful sight, and for the first time in what felt like forever, hope wasn't just a flicker on the horizon but a blazing beacon, albeit one that still required a fair amount of duct tape to keep from shorting out. Dominic leaned forward, his eyes glued to the display. "Looks like they're retreating." "Cowards." "Smart," Kelly corrected, her words laced with a grudging respect. "They know when they're beat." The dome trembled once more, but this time it felt different, less like the harbinger of doom and more like the creaking of an old house settling after a storm. The temperature, while still frigid, seemed a bit less vicious, a bit more manageable. "We did it," Isolde said, the words tasting sweet on her tongue. She looked at her team, her ragtag band of misfits who had somehow managed to thumb their noses at the universe and come out ahead. "We actually did it. Let's not celebrate just yet," Dominic cautioned, ever the voice of grounded pessimism. "We're still stuck in this metal coffin." "Not for long," Kelly said, her confidence rekindled. "I say we pack up and leave before they change their minds." Isolde nodded, the reality of their situation crashing over her like a wave. They had won, but the game wasn't over. The aliens might have retreated, but who knew when they'd regroup and come back with a vengeance? Staying put wasn't an option. "All right, let's get moving," she ordered, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd just clutched victory from the jaws of despair. "Pack up anything useful and leave the rest. We're getting out of here." Dominic cracked his knuckles, the sound a sharp punctuation in the otherwise silent room. "Finally, a plan I can get behind." Kelly rolled her eyes but couldn't hide her smile. "You just like the idea of not freezing to death." "True," Dominic agreed, grinning. "But mostly, I like the idea of not dying under 1,000,000 tons of alien-infected ice." The team sprang into action, the command center transforming from a tense battleground into a hive of activity. Equipment was gathered, data stored, and systems shut down with the efficiency of people who had spent too much time preparing for the worst. "Once we're topside, we'll figure out our next move," Isolde said, more to herself than anyone else. "But for now, let's focus on getting out in one piece." The journey to the surface would be treacherous, but it was a hell of a lot better than staying put and hoping the aliens wouldn't change their minds. And as they worked, their banter continued, a soothing balm against the uncertainty of the future. "You think this'll make headlines back home?" Kelly asked, her voice laced with sarcasm. Dominic shrugged. "If it does, we should probably get someone else to handle the press conference. You know, someone who doesn't look like they just crawled out from under a rock." "I take offense to that," Kelly shot back, feigning outrage. "I've crawled out from under plenty of rocks and looked fabulous doing it." Isolde couldn't help but chuckle at their antics. Their irreverence was infectious, a reminder that no matter how dire things got, they'd always have each other and their collective snark to fall back on. "And when this is all over," she said, her tone both weary and hopeful, "we're going to find that beach, with those cold drinks and warm company." Dominic grinned, that usual mischievous glint in his eye. "I'll hold you to that, Doc." The team moved with purpose, a determination born from desperation and the taste of victory. They loaded up what they could carry, leaving behind a facility that had been both prison and playground, a place where they'd face down the cosmos and come out on top. "Ready?" Isolde asked as they gathered at the exit, the path ahead leading upwards through the icy depths of Europa. "Born ready," Dominic replied, ever the cocky survivor. Kelly rolled her eyes but nodded. "Let's get the hell out of here." Together, they stepped into the unknown, a ragtag band of humans who had faced the abyss and refused to blink. Their journey was far from over, but they faced it with the confidence of those who knew they'd weathered the worst the universe could throw at them. "Here's to the future," Isolde said, raising an imaginary glass as they set off. "May it be less of a pain in the ass than today." "Amen to that," Dominic and Kelly chorused, their voices a harmonious blend of sarcasm and hope. And with that they moved forward, leaving behind the lunatic asylum and all its horrors. Together they were unstoppable, a force of nature in the vast, uncaring cosmos. And whatever lay ahead, they would face it head-on, with humor, defiance, and a healthy dose of human snark. The lunatic asylum wasn't exactly a name that inspired confidence. If anything, it was the kind of moniker that made you think twice about your career choices, assuming you had any choice to begin with. But as the team stumbled their way back to the command center, Isolde Thorn realized that the name was more than fitting. After all, what kind of sane person volunteered to live under a few miles of alien-infested ice just for the sake of science? But reflections were a luxury for later. Now, there was the small matter of not letting the whole place collapse around them. Well, that was a proper shit show, Dominic announced as he dusted off his hands, as though he'd just finished a particularly gruesome chore. On the bright side, we ain't dead. Yet, Kelly chimed in, tapping away at her wrist console. Give it a couple of days tops, and we might start missing the idea of death by alien-induced hypothermia. Isolde rolled her eyes, the kind of eye roll that could earn a medal if it were an Olympic sport. She surveyed the damage from their not-so-grand escape. The command center was still intact, if you considered intact to mean surprisingly still standing despite the odds. Consoles were flickering like an old neon sign, and the metal walls groaned with the kind of ominous undertone that suggested they were on borrowed time. First things first, she said, shaking off the creeping fatigue. We need to assess the damage and see what's salvageable. Dominic, get those micro-adjusters on your helmet working and see if you can stabilize the systems. Kelly, run a diagnostic on the life support. It's still colder than a divorce lawyer's handshake in here. Dominic cocked an eyebrow. And what are you gonna do, oh fearless leader? Watch us sweat. Isolde smirked. I'll be over there contemplating how to break the news to Central Command that their billion-dollar investment is now a snow globe for extraterrestrial toddlers. Kelly snorted as she typed furiously. Good luck with that. Maybe open with a joke. I hear management loves those. A joke? Isolde mused, checking the power levels with a sigh. How about, why did the scientist cross the ice? To get the hell away from the aliens who made it their personal playground. Comedy gold, Dominic deadpanned, fingers flying over his console. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'll be here trying not to pass out from hypoxia while I do my magic. The truth was, for all their bluster, they were knackered. Weeks of constant vigilance, hoping not to die in the most ridiculous manner imaginable, had taken its toll. The chaos they'd unleashed on the alien communications was great, but the aftereffects were less flashy and much more tedious. They needed to patch up the dome, stabilize their systems, and somehow not draw any more attention. Okay, so the micro-adjusters are working for now, Dominic announced. Not sure how long they'll last, though. Might want to start praying to whatever deity you believe in, or don't. Can't hurt to try, Kelly sighed. Life support's operational barely. We're looking at hours, maybe half a day tops before it craps out again. Isolde took a deep breath, feeling the chill in the air like an unwelcome guest. All right, so we've got a few hours to fix what we can and hightail it out of here. Piece of cake, right? Dominic chuckled darkly. If only. But hey, nothing like impending doom to keep you on your toes. Kelly snorted a laugh. Yeah, keeps life interesting. That, and the constant threat of freezing from the inside out. They worked in silence for a while, a comfortable one born from shared struggle and a grim understanding of their reality. They weren't heroes, just a bunch of overly curious humans who had bitten off more than they could chew. Yet here they were, alive against all odds. It was almost enough to make you believe in miracles, or at least in the stubbornness of the human spirit. As they worked, Isolde found her thoughts drifting to humanity's place in the cosmos. There was a time when they'd thought themselves alone, masters of their destiny. But Europa had taught them otherwise. The universe was vast and indifferent, and they were just tiny blips trying to make sense of it all. Hey, you think anyone will remember this? Kelly asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Dominic looked up, a screwdriver dangling from his mouth like a makeshift cigar. You kidding? This'll be one for the history books. How to Bungle an Alien Encounter 101. Isolde chuckled, though it felt a bit hollow. Assuming we get out of here to tell the tale. But we will, Kelly said with a surprising amount of conviction. Because if there's one thing we're good at, it's surviving against the odds. We may be idiots for coming here, but we're tenacious idiots. Here's to tenacity. Dominic raised an imaginary glass, a lopsided grin on his face. May it keep us from becoming very literal space ice cream. The joke hung in the air, a momentary reprieve from the grim reality. They were battered and bruised, but they weren't beaten. Not yet. And as they continued their repairs, Isolde felt a tiny ember of hope ignite within her, a stubborn refusal to give up. "All right, systems are looking stable," Dominic finally announced with a hint of satisfaction. "For now, anyway," Kelly nodded, a rare smile on her lips. "Life support's holding steady. We just might make it through this after all." Isolde took a moment to look around, her gaze lingering on the team. They'd been through hell and back, but they'd done it together. And in the grand scheme of things, that was all that mattered. "Good work, team," she said, her voice a little softer than usual. "Let's finish up here and get ready to leave. We've got a long journey ahead." As they gathered their gear and prepared to depart, the weight of the past few weeks settled over them. They'd come to Europa seeking knowledge, perhaps a bit of fame. Instead, they'd found something else entirely, a renewed respect for the unknown and a deeper appreciation for the bonds that had kept them going. "Hey, you think we'll ever come back here?" Dominic asked as they stood at the entrance to the exit shaft. Isolde shrugged, a small smile on her lips. "Maybe, but next time let's bring a bigger disruptor and a hell of a lot more snacks." Kelly laughed as they began their ascent. "And maybe a better sense of self-preservation. Where's the fun in that?" Dominic teased, his voice echoing in the narrow passage. As they climbed, Isolde let herself wonder about the future. There was so much they didn't know, so much still waiting to be discovered. But whatever came next, she knew they'd face it together, with humor and determination, just as they always had. In the end, it wasn't about the aliens or the ice or the endless challenges. It was about the people beside you, sharing the journey, making the unbearable a little more bearable with each snarky comment and shared laugh. "Here's to the future," Isolde murmured, a sense of optimism creeping into her voice. "To whatever madness it brings," Dominic replied, grinning. And with that, they continued their ascent, leaving behind the lunatic asylum and its alien mysteries. The universe was vast and unyielding, but so were they. And as they moved forward into the unknown, they did so with the knowledge that they weren't alone. After all, it wasn't about the destination. It was about the journey and the people who made that journey worth taking. Together, they were unstoppable, a force of nature in a cosmos that had underestimated their tenacity. And whatever lay ahead, they would face it head-on, with humor, defiance, and a healthy dose of human snark.